Welcome back, everybody. Now let's take a look at restricted categories. So let's take a look at what they are, which categories are restricted, why you may want to sell in them, and how you can get accepted as a seller in these restricted categories. Now, even as a brand new seller and even with no selling history, you can apply to get accepted in restricted categories. Now, there is no guarantee that you will be accepted, but this lecture is going to give you the best possible chance. Once you have some selling history behind you, then you have a much higher chance of getting accepted. But saying that, we have many students in this course who have gotten accepted right out of the gate in some of these restricted categories. Right, so why would you even want to bother when there are plenty of categories that are not restricted and you can just start selling? The reason is because some of the restricted categories, and especially health and beauty, has massive volume. So health and beauty in particular is a very, very high volume category. And there are many, many opportunities. There's also more competition. But because there are more opportunities and because the volume is so high, even with a lot of competition, you can still do very, very well in these high volume categories. Now, vitamin C serum I'm using here as an example. There are lots and lots of sellers for this particular type of product. But even so, a lot of those sellers are selling a lot of units every single day. So even though there's a lot of competition for products like this, there is a huge demand for them. So the volume is very high. So even with a lot of sellers, you can still do well. Now, when you are selling something like this, something that is very competitive and in a very competitive category, your presentation, the presentation of your product, so your listing and everything else, your packaging, it really has to be spot on. So you really have to bring your A game to this sort of thing. Now, if you follow the course Lessons for Listing and Ranking, but as well as that, follow the branding advice as well, the lecture we have on branding, because you would want to brand your product right from the start. Otherwise, you wouldn't be giving yourself a real chance of succeeding. So with products that are very high volume and high competition, so a lot of products in the health and beauty category, I'm just talking about that category just now because among the restricted categories, that is the one where most people would be gravitating towards because there are so many opportunities, there are so many different products you can sell, and also there is such high demand for these products. There are other categories as well that you may want to sell in, such as grocery and clothing. Now, these categories, similar thing, you can get approved to sell in those categories and do well, but they are not as high volume as the health and beauty category. But you do need to brand right out of the gate in order to stand a good chance. Now, even with following everything in this course, even having a great listing, even having a branded product with great images and everything else, you're still going to have to put in a lot of work to get a listing established. Now, once you get a listing established in a category like health and beauty with a high volume product, once it's established, it can make you a lot of money. But you do have to put that work in. You'll probably have to do multiple promotions, and the amount of units that you need to run for each promotion, you're probably looking for at least 50 per promotion to actually make an impact. But the great thing about products that are in high demand, so very popular products, is that you don't need to lose any money on a promotion. You only need to discount down to say where you are breaking even as opposed to losing money, because you'll still get plenty of takers with a discount. You don't have to knock a lot of money off with these high demand products. Now, I just want to also say, just in case anybody doesn't realize, that if you are sourcing a product that's edible or topical, so any kind of supplements or anything that goes on the skin, any kind of cream or topical product, or anything that's consumed, supplements, food, anything at all that you eat or that an animal eats, that you cannot source these products from China. You must source them either domestically in the country where you're actually selling, or in a country where all the correct regulations are in place regarding the manufacture of the product. So if you want to apply for approval in a restricted category, what you need to do first of all is you need to check the requirements for the category that you want to apply for approval in. Now here's the current list on Amazon.com. Now to see the list on any other marketplace, so Amazon.co.uk or Amazon.it or Amazon.ca for example, just log into your seller account, go to help and just type in categories requiring approval and you will get the link. You can even go to Google and type in categories requiring approval on Amazon.co.uk, for example, and you'll probably get a link. But you can't click through and view the requirements unless you're logged in to your seller account. Now, the requirements are similar for most restricted categories, but they're not identical. So each category has its own specific requirements. Now, one thing I want to point out here is that some categories that were previously on this list for Amazon.com, just until recently, they are no longer on it. So until recently, we had health and beauty on the list, and we had scientific and industrial, we had clothing on the list as well. Now, these categories are no longer on the list, but that doesn't mean you don't need approval. So when these categories were removed from the list a few months ago, there were lots of blog posts floating around and people making videos saying, yay, health and beauty, it's no longer a gated category, it's no longer restricted, anybody can sell in health and beauty now. That's actually not true, because the way it works now is that instead of applying for approval for the actual category, you are required to apply for approval for the individual products that you want to sell within those categories. Now, there will be some products in those categories you don't need approval for, and an example of that might be in health and beauty. If you wanted to sell nail scissors or nail clippers or something like that that falls under the health and beauty category, but it wouldn't require approval. But anything that's actually going to be selling really a lot, so these high volume products, so anything to do with skincare or supplements or beauty or anything like that at all, is likely to require approval on an individual product basis. So that's now how it works, and that is why those categories are not on this list anymore, but they are still not open categories. Now, one thing you can do to help yourself get approval is, before you apply for approval at Amazon, is set up a website specifically for your product or your products. A very basic site will do, and if you have no idea how to set up a site, you can go over to a website called Upwork.com, where you will find somebody that will do the whole thing for you, probably for around about $100, maybe $150 tops, and you will get a decent job done. Now, you will need to provide the content for that website to the person who's going to set the website up for you, but you can get a website set up there if it's going to be a big learning curve for you, and if it's something you just want to get done quickly to help you get approval. Now, the other thing that will be required as part of the approval process is invoices for the product you want to sell. And it's kind of a catch-22 situation, because you don't know if you're going to get approval, but you still need invoices. Amazon's way of looking at this is that, well, if you're going to be selling a skincare or cosmetics or supplements or any of these very high demand products, as far as they are concerned, you were already selling them, so therefore you ought to have invoices, because that's the reason it's restricted in the first place, because they don't want people coming in with low quality products, perhaps even counterfeit branded products, that sort of thing. So they're really looking for people who are already selling the product before they come along and also want to sell it on Amazon. That doesn't mean that you have to be already selling the product. We can get around this, but we need to get the invoices. Now, you can ask your supplier that instead of supplying with one invoice, so for example, if you buy 50 units, instead of giving you an invoice for 50 units, they give you 4 invoices for whatever, 15 units each, or split it up into 4, but the invoices would also need to be dated differently as well. So you do need to ask sometimes to get these things, or you just buy a small quantity and then a few weeks later another small quantity until you've got enough. But you can start off, don't forget, you can start off with just a few units, but you do need those invoices. Now the thing is, Amazon used to ask for 3 invoices, but now we don't know how many invoices they're going to ask for. It kind of varies. So they may only ask for 1 invoice, or they may ask for 5, or they may ask for more. It really is going to depend. The best thing to do, your best bet, let's go back here a minute. Your best bet is to view the requirements. So click through and view the requirements on the restricted category you want to sell in. Now, of course, problem being, if you want to sell in health and beauty, it's no longer on the list, so you no longer have requirements to look at to know what you need to do in order to sell a particular product. But from my experience, I can tell you that they like to see a website. It's not usually a requirement, but they like to see one. If they see a website, that's going to give you a much, much higher chance of being approved. And you want a few invoices, so have a few invoices to hand, maybe 3 invoices to hand. Now, if you have a website, sometimes that means that the other requirements won't be so rigid. So that's one thing to bear in mind. Now, if you want to sell in a restricted category, you shouldn't let what I've just told you in this lecture put you off, because anybody who wants to sell in one of these categories or sell a restricted product, they have to go through this process. And if everybody just gave up, there'd be nobody selling in these categories on Amazon. It's all part of it. If you want something, you need to go through the process, overcome the obstacles and the challenges. So if you want to sell in one of these categories, I recommend that you go ahead and try. If you get turned down, it will very likely be because you're a new seller. So just wait, maybe a month or 2, maybe 3 months, and apply again, and you'll probably get accepted. There are some categories which will have further requirements, so the requirements will be much stricter. Now, one of those is jewellery. Now, jewellery is impossible for a new seller to get into because you need 12 months selling history on Amazon, and you also need a physical store location. That is how hard it is now to get into jewellery. So jewellery is probably going to be out of the question for most of you, if not all of you. And sometimes a category is closed to new sellers and you can't apply to get approval in that category, but it's always temporary and it opens again. Sometimes it's closed for a short time and sometimes it's closed for several months. Anyway, the toys category as well, just so you know, over the holiday Christmas selling period, this is a restricted category. So you need approval to sell toys over the holiday period, but you don't need approval the rest of the year round. And if you start selling toys at any other time of the year, apart from the Christmas period, so any other time when you are allowed and you don't need approval, when the time comes round, running up to the Christmas holidays, if you've been selling toys already, then your chances of getting approval are very, very high and almost guaranteed, providing that you have a good account history. So providing you don't have a lot of negative feedback for poor quality products or something like that. So if you want to sell toys, then you start at any other time of the year except for the Christmas selling time. All right, see you in a minute.